I have Patrick with me, Campbell, the only one, founder and CEO of ProfitWell, which recently joined forces with Paddle. That was a
I
little
did.
bit of big news in the SaaS tech, microcosm. Well, very excited to have you. This is session 3 of the first half. This is the first track, Hot Takes Live. If you missed the previous hot takes, not to worry, we're going to share them, both deck and recording, so you will have access to everything. Beyond excited to listen into this one, Patrick.
Oh no.
The of your session is very on brand. I'm sure you will have a lot of juicy takes on it. Most things people get it pretty wrong.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think it's one of those things where I think we only have 10 minutes, so I'm gonna jump in if that's cool
Yes,
with you. Yeah,
absolutely.
because
Go for it.
yeah, so as Armando was saying, Patrick Campbell, I'm the CEO founder of a company called ProfitWell. We just recently sold. I'll tell you a little bit about us in a second. But I've been talking about pricing now for about a decade, particularly in the SaaS and subscription space, and wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a framework as much as I can in 10 minutes, and then also balance it out with some tactics here. But just in the nature of the beauty, hold on a second. Let me share my screen here. Just in terms of the beauty of the Hot Takes Live kind of ethos here, I wanted to start off with a nice little hot cake. And that hot take is basically you, and it doesn't really matter what role you're in, what type of business you're in, etc. You're a scaredy cat when it comes to your pricing. And it's mainly because when you think about pricing, and I've seen this time and time again in different companies, pricing is one of those things that sits at the intersection of both important and uncomfortable. And whenever we have things that sit at the intersection of that, all of a sudden, like we end up getting really scared, and all of a sudden go to the path of least resistance, which is another marketing campaign or a new sales playbook or a new feature or something like that. And unfortunately, this is costing you like a good amount of money. And I know you might be thinking like, that's okay, Patrick. Like, I'm awesome. My business is amazing. Like, everything's great or everything can be great. And pricing's important, but I'm not really sure if I really need to listen. Like, here's some data to kind of like really, really take you through and kind of punch you in the face a little bit. Um, and it really gets into like what's happening in the market, and not the market as in like, oh, there's a downturn right now or something like that, but just in the market over the past decade. I pulled this fresh data actually a month ago, and what's really kind of fascinating is that if you're a business, not just in like the greater business community, but specifically in tech, there's just these hard constraints that we're facing today that we weren't facing long ago. The first one is that right now, if you start a business today, you're going to have about 15 to 16 times the number of competitors than if you started that business 10 years ago. And this is because we've made it quote unquote easy to get started. You can spin up a website, spin up a server, everyone and their mother can have like a SaaS app and an ebook and all these other things. And all of a sudden there's just a lot more noise in the market. And because of that noise, and because we haven't had like a brand new marketing channel since 2015, I guess TikTok counts, but we've gone from new marketing channels every single quarter to new marketing channels every 5 years. You're also seeing CAC, your customer acquisition costs, up about 130% over the past decade. So those customers who are costing you $100 to acquire 10 years ago, they're now costing you over $200 to acquire today. And then you might be thinking like, that's really cute, Patrick, but like we're in a really good space. We're the dominant part of the market. Our CAC is pretty good. Well, on the running side of your business, all of a sudden team tenure, like the people you're hiring across the board in tech, that team tenure is down a third, which is kind of insane to think about in the past 10 years. And then just kind of our way of kind of fixing that has been, oh God, let's pay everybody more, which means that it's not really solving the tenure problem, but we're not only having this tenure problem, but we're also paying people a lot more, which, is the whole philosophical discussion of whether that's great for the world or not. But for you, as someone who's trying to grow your business, it's a lot harder. And to bring this back to pricing, the reason that this is so important is because a lot of the leaders, a lot of the people you're getting advice from, from back in the day, for lack of a better phrase, they are so focused on the acquisition part of the market that you as a leader need to really think about how you can grow beyond just kind of selling and spending your way out of the hole that's been created by the market kind of coming into its own. And what I mean by this is if you really think about breaking down the three big growth levers within your business, acquiring customers, monetizing them, and retaining them, what you'll find is that most of the growth from the hyper growth companies that's coming from is from your monetization and your retention. Let me show this to you for a second. So we did a study where we broke down these three particular levers, and we wanted to figure out if we improved each of them by the same relative amount. So we improved lead flow by 1% versus improving your revenue per customer by 1% versus improving your retention by 1%. What would be the impact on revenue? And what we found is that if you improve these things by 1%, you're going to not necessarily see the most revenue come from improving your acquisition, improving your sales. And this isn't to say that like we should not spend as much money as we do in sales and marketing. You're going to spend probably 60% or more of your budget on sales and marketing. But it is to say if we really evaluate these other areas of our business, we'll probably find that we're not spending as much money as we should, or is not spending as much time. So that's my like quick punch in the face and I'm out. No, I'm just kidding. Like that, I'm not going to leave you kind of hanging there. But we're going to talk a little bit about like how to actually think about this and how to fix this. Again, only got 10 minutes, so only got a few things that I can share with you. But to give a really quick background on where some of this data comes from, my background's in econometrics and math, which is code for having a lot of friends as a child. That's my dad joke of the day, but I help run a company now called Paddle. ProfitWell got bought by Paddle, and we basically help subscription businesses run and grow automatically. And where this data comes from is we have this metrics product that basically 30,000 different subscription companies use to get all of their free financial reporting. So we're able to study that particular data, and that's where all this information is kind of coming from. So when I give you data, it's not just me, pulling out of my bum here. It's like actual data that's happening within the market. And the way we make money is we, have a couple of tools that help with your pricing and your retention, as well as with your billing and tax and those types of things. And so not trying to sell you, just trying to give you that context. But the two things I want to kind of walk through is one, like how to think about pricing, and then two, how to actually change your pricing. And there's a bunch of things that go in between those two pieces, but we're not going to have time to go deep on that. And the first thing around pricing is one, obviously it's important. Obviously we've talked about it, but two, what are the levers that you actually have with pricing? I think it's a really, really important thing that we don't really think about as a company or as an industry as much as we should. And what I mean by that is when you think about your business, and again, it doesn't matter what kind of business you are, everything that you've done is like gone into creating some sort of value. And because we don't trade like goat for wheat in most of the markets that we play in, we basically say that value is worth this much. And so the way to think about your price at a very 30,000 foot view is your price is the exchange rate on the value that you've created. And what's kind of beautiful about that is if we go a little bit lower, we can start to realize that everything we're doing is driving someone to a point of conversion or justifying that product or that value or that price that we're putting on that value. And so your pricing becomes, your monetization becomes not only the number you're charging, but also who are you going after? We can go up market, we can change verticals. There's a whole host of things that we can do. It goes into what product are you offering? Not only what the actual features are, but how do we package those features? Do we put them in 3 tiers? Do we take some out and make them add-ons? And then ultimately it does get into the price, but not just the actual price point, but it also gets into like all of the different things that you can do with the positioning of your company. And to give you a really, really quick like evolution of pricing, most of us start off with like just one particular tier, right? We're like, let's just keep it simple. We're launching the night after, like, let's just get it out there and kind of go from there. But oftentimes what we realize is like, oh, we have different customers we sell to. So let's have good, better, and then best, right? But maybe those features differentiating these different tiers aren't really great. So we start to realize like, well, what if we develop those a little bit? What if we had an enterprise tier? And what if we started specializing those particular features in these individual tiers? And this is where most of us end up stopping, because most of the time we end up not really thinking through like, well, how can I extend this? How can I get all of those different types of customers? And one of the primary ways to get all of those different types of customers is by using something that's called a value metric, which is basically how you charge. It could be up to a certain amount of a particular data point in a given month. It could be based on kind of like Twilio, where you're charging on an incremental basis, and it could be a bunch of different ways that you actually structure it. But this value metric based pricing tends to be the best way to price, especially in the world of SaaS, mainly because you're charging customers for what they're actually using, not necessarily charging customers for like too much and then they end up churning. We're not going to be able to go super deep in how to set these value metrics, but this is the one big thing that if you had to go deep on something that's going to be a little bit harder, this is the thing that separates those companies, because they're basically baking growth into how they make money and how they're actually pricing, because all of a sudden those customers are going to use more and some customers are going to use a lot more, and therefore they're going to upgrade really quickly. Now, I promised I was going to give you something really tactical, and so I'm definitely going to do it. So there's a lot of changes you might be making about your pricing, but like, how do we actually communicate those changes? Well, I find that when people are thinking about raising their price, for example, or even changing up their value metric like we talked about, or changing up their features or their tiers, they get really worried because they kind of think that people don't realize that things cost money, right? They think, oh, people are going to be scared of pricing. And what's kind of cool is that when you do your research, you start to realize that like people are okay as long as you don't mess up how you communicate and don't mess up what you're actually doing, which I understand is a higher bar, but let me explain. So the first thing is like, I'm not a big fan of legacying your pricing. I think it's one of those things where if you keep old customers on their existing plans, oftentimes they don't necessarily like really see the value, and all of a sudden you're capping your growth on those particular customers. But you can make a value judgment if you want to keep people on their plans. But if you're not, or even if you're just going to raise prices or change prices on new customers, you got to do your research. And we're not going to be able to go deep into how to do that research right now. But it's really important to understand, like, if we're at $50 a month, should we be increasing it to $100 a month, or should we be increasing to $200 a month? You want to obviously know that before you communicate it. And once you have that particular number, let's say we're raising prices by 30% or something along that line, then it really comes down to making sure we do an impact analysis and just making sure that no one's getting probably greater than like a 50 to 75% increase on their price. And if you do have to raise your prices that much, you can choose to rip the Band-Aid off, or you can essentially choose to stage that out over a number of years, because you're really only going to want to raise prices maybe once on a customer per year, but not necessarily more than once unless you're really flying. Now, the messaging is where things are key, and don't everyone steal this email because you're going to ruin it for everybody. But here's a really good framework and a template. So if I'm changing or raising a price on someone, I'm going to first remind them of how much value that I've provided them. Hey, we've made you this much money. We've brought you this many contacts. You've processed this many leads, whatever it ends up being. I'm going to remind you like, hey, there's this new feature that we launched. And also there's this other feature that you love because you use it every single day. I'm actually pulling in that data. Then I'm going to say, in the context of them, for us to make the product better for them, we need to increase our prices. No matter how beloved your product is, everyone's still going to be a little bit shocked. And so I'm going to go, but because you've been so loyal to us, you've used us for the past 4.5 years, we're raising prices on everyone else who wasn't loyal. But for you, we're going to keep your existing price for the next X months. And that's worth this much to you, which is a really powerful way, because it's about them, right? It's always going to shock people still, so give people an out. Hey, if you have any questions, let me know. And then my personal favorite, if this materially impacts your business or your life, if you're a consumer product, let me know and we'll work something out. This is for two types of people. It's for the people probably watching this. We never want to spend more money, but if you went through and you told me all the value and all this other stuff, I'd go, okay, I'm not going to cause a fuss. Or for its people who are actually impacted, it's one of those things that, hey, they'll try to negotiate, and you can use a really good brand opportunity to be like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out from there. But the important thing, make it about them, not about you. And that legacy discount works really well. To wrap up here, just because I'm a little over time, hopefully you realize this is not hard. It is definitely just a process. You just got to cuddle with the chaos of it, just like every other thing within your business. And if I can be more helpful, this is my email address. I'm mostly on Twitter. But yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me go a little bit over here, Armando and crew.
It's all good. Love you, Patrick. I think the thing that I appreciate the most about you and what you did with ProfitWell is that you got this down to a science. And like there is proof points everywhere, and this is also my personal experience, like pricing and packaging is the single least appreciated value metric for pretty much 100% of the companies.
Yeah.
Right. Early stage companies, 100% of them. Mid stage companies, very, very many, like very, very percent. There's later stage companies as well. And another thing that I experienced, which is surprising for most people, which I'm curious whether it's your experience as well. And in the meantime, if anyone has additional questions, feel free to write them in the comments here, is that when you do price increases, and like your email, it's a surefire way of manage that. So I appreciate you sharing that. When you do price increases, there is very little to no pushback from customers when you do it right. Is that your experience as well?
So it does depend. I think to make a nice concrete answer here, most of the time people never did any research on what they should be charged anyways. Like they just they read something and they were like, oh, Basecamp charges $100 per month. We should just do that, right? Yeah, let's just do that, right? And this is why I was kind of showing you like the evolution of like how companies actually like get better at pricing.
Features not built yet. Features we will never build.
Yeah, right. But the thing is like you set it at $50, $100, right? And then you just like set it. That was just the next 5 years. And the problem is that your customers, a lot of them might be looking at that and seeing it. Your prospects might be seeing it as too cheap, and then there's some folks who think it's too expensive. And this is why it goes to the 3 prices. But to your point, one of the biggest things is because you haven't done that homework. If you're not losing deals because of your price, you're not testing that pricing power, right? You actually might be losing deals because of that price. And so I have found that about 80 to 90% of companies that I've interacted with or seen the data on, they're underpriced. And then when they do this, there's a little bit of churn because it's just like sending a receipt, right? Like you'll remind people they're purchasing something. So some people, they're like, oh yeah, I don't want that product anymore. But then you'll see the churn go actually lower than it once was. And I love seeing people. This is why I wrote the emails, because I was like, even if you copy and paste it, which you shouldn't, you get, it's like a gateway drug. You're like, oh, that was fine. We had one guy who complained, but that was because our support experience was bad for him. But let's do something else. Let's figure something else out. It's kind of like a gateway into things. You just have to get over that anxiety.
And the other thing that I find most people don't appreciate is that these days software is really competing with the cost of hiring someone, right? Or having a team that does this in a manual, processy kind of way, right? And then it goes back to your comment around turnover and raise in terms of compensations and inefficiencies there. And so that also to some degree advocates for a fair price that is, a portion of that value. And in that sense, it's probably higher than you think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's just one of those things that, like I said in the beginning, it's like everything else in your business. Treat it like a process, treat it like product development, customer development, find a framework. The number you're caring about is revenue per customer. That's the number that ARPU, ACV, whatever your business allows, that's the number that should be going up and to the right over time.
Love it. Patrick, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much. We're slightly over time. Appreciate your time here. We'll take a break and then come back together after lunch at 12:45 for speed networking. And at 1 for who doesn't want to participate in that, for part 2 of this day together. Thank you so much.